On 21st July 1927, the state of Pará signed a concession, 1 million hectares of tapajos, forest reserved for a single corporate experiment. Henry Ford authorized machines, money, and plans drawn in Dearborn, prefabricated bungalows, a diesel power plant, a 128-bed hospital by Albert Kahn, a sawmill, tractors, and steamers, all loaded aboard the lake, Ormoc and the barge Lake Farge, and pushed up the Amazon in August 1928. Men cleared grid, streets on lateritic uplands. Timber docks were cut into the tapajos. Rubber seedlings were planted in rigid, geometric rows at 12-14-meter spacing. The plantation laid out like an assembly line where trees would be parts. Fordlândia presented itself as industrial order, American voltage, cafeteria mess halls, a baseball diamond, a municipal plan shipped from the Midwest. The company's aim was specific and measurable: secure rubber for Ford's tires. And the tools were precise: rolling mills, crate machines, narrow-gauge rails, barges to carry supply and product. But this was not an empty field. Rainfall measured in meters, soils thin and leached, a living forest already host to fungi, insects, and seasonal floods. The company imposed its grid on a moving, breathing system, an engineered certainty placed inside an ecology with its own rules. Welcome to Fordlândia. The system, 1926-1928. The decision to build Fordlândia did not begin in Brazil. It began in Dearborn, Michigan. By the mid-1920s, the Ford Motor Company depended entirely on natural rubber imported from Southeast Asia, British-controlled. Plantations in Malaya and the Dutch East Indies supplied most of the world's latex. Prices fluctuated. Political leverage rested elsewhere. For Henry Ford, this dependence was unacceptable. In 1926, Ford approved a plan to secure rubber directly, not through contracts, but through ownership. The solution was vertical integration. Ford would control the land, the labor, the processing, and the export. No intermediaries, no colonial administrators, a single corporate system, designed and enforced from the United States. Brazil offered what Asia did not. Rubber was native to the Amazon. Negotiations moved quickly. On 21st July 1927, the government of Pará granted Ford Motor Company a concession of 1 million hectares along the Tapajos River. The tract was known as Boa Vista. The agreement exempted Ford from export taxes and customs duties. In return, after a 12-year grace period, Ford would share 9% of profits, 7% federal, 2% local. Half of the land was privately purchased from Jorge Dumont Villares for approximately US $125,000. Remainder was state land. The concession was ratified by the Pará legislature in September 1927. Ford never visited the site. He never walked the land. All decisions were made by correspondence. In August 1928, the company moved from paper to execution. 2 ships departed Detroit, the Lake Ormoc. Towing the Lake Farge, they carried 2,000 tons of cargo, prefabricated houses, tractors, sawmill machinery, power generators, medical equipment, tools, food stores, and administrative supplies. Everything required to build a town from nothing. The convoy reached Belém, then steamed up the Amazon to Santarém. From there, barges moved upriver along the Tapajos. There were no roads. Every object, every bolt, beam, and engine arrived by water. On 25th of October 1928, ground was broken. The site sat roughly 50 meters above river level, on lateritic uplands. From above, the land appeared flat and manageable. On the ground, it was dense forest, oxysols stripped of nutrients by millennia of rainfall. Captain Einard Oxholm, a Danish sea captain with no background in tropical agronomy, was appointed general manager. His task was immediate and absolute: clear the jungle, impose order, and build the town. Trees were felled by hand. Debris was burned in place. No topsoil was preserved. Terraces were cut into slopes. Roads were driven through clay that turned to slurry during the wet season. By late 1928, the layout was visible: a rigid grid, straight avenues, zoned housing. Managers lived in American-style bungalows with screened porches and lawns. Skilled workers occupied small family houses. Single laborers were placed in long dormitory barracks. A diesel power plant, water tower, sewage system, hospital, school, commissary, and dock followed. Electricity ran at 110 volts DC, American standard. The town ran on American time. Rubber seedlings, Hevea brasiliensis, were planted in straight rows, spaced 12 to 14 meters apart, mirroring Southeast Asian plantation models. The assumption was simple: rubber grew here once. It would grow again, faster, cleaner, more efficiently. No allowance was made for biodiversity. No mixed planting. No indigenous spacing. This was monoculture imposed at industrial scale. By November 1928, the system met resistance. When Ford replaced table service with cafeteria-style dining, workers protested violently. The mess hall was destroyed. Armed with machetes, laborers attacked kitchen equipment and furnishings. Brazilian troops were called in to restore order. Construction continued regardless. By 1930, Fordlândia possessed a hospital with 128 beds, a sawmill, an 8-kilometer logging railway, over 100 kilometers of internal roads, and docks capable of receiving ocean-built steamers. Recruitment offices operated in Manaus and Belém, promising high wages and steady work. Labor came from rural Pará, the Amazon basin, the Caribbean, and indigenous communities along the Tapajós. The town functioned. The machinery ran. The trees grew. On paper, Fordlândia was operational, but the system was already absorbing costs it could not record. Soil depletion, fungal exposure, labor volatility, logistical drag. None of these appeared in the original projections. By the end of 1928, an American industrial city stood in the Amazon, unpowered, regulated and supplied entirely from outside. A machine designed to extract certainty from an environment that did not offer it. Fordlândia was no longer an idea. It was a system in motion. Fordlândia was built to run continuously. The rubber trees would take years to mature, but the town itself was expected to function immediately. Disciplined, predictable, and compliant. For that, Ford needed labor. Not seasonal labor, not itinerant tappers, but a permanent workforce shaped to industrial rhythm. Recruitment began in Manaus and Belém in late year 1928. Ford agents advertised wages far above local standards, approximately $6 to crate per day, equivalent to US $1 to $2, with free housing, meals, and medical care. Contracts were written in Portuguese, issued annually, and governed wages, housing, and conduct. Men arrived by river in waves. They came from rural Pará, from the Amazon interior, from Caribbean islands, Jamaica, Barbados, Panama, and from indigenous communities along the Tapajós. Munduruku men were hired as guides and forest cutters, valued for their knowledge of terrain and paid above local rates. On arrival, workers were processed. They were issued ID badges, assigned housing by rank, scheduled by the clock. Workdays followed fixed hours unfamiliar to the region. Tasks were regimented: clearing, planting, hauling, construction. Supervision was constant. American foremen controlled crews. Brazilian intermediaries translated orders. Ford's system extended beyond work. Meals were centralized. Recreation was scheduled. Alcohol was restricted or banned. Brothels were closed. Gambling, playing cards, and sometimes football were prohibited. Attendance at religious services was encouraged, later enforced. Saturday afternoons and Sundays were structured around company-approved activities. Baseball games, films, lectures. Food followed American standards. The cafeteria served hamburgers, canned vegetables, bacon, bread. Brazilian staples and farinha, beans, fish prepared local ways were limited or absent. Workers ate standing in lines, carrying trays, self-serving. For many, this was the breaking point. In November 1928, the change to cafeteria service triggered the first major revolt. Workers armed with machetes destroyed the mess halls, furnishings, and kitchen equipment. The protest was not symbolic. It was direct, physical, and collective. Brazilian military or police units were deployed to restore order. No concessions were made. The system tightened. By 1929, Fordlândia operated its own company police force. Guards patrolled streets and work sites. After curfews were introduced, movement was monitored. Bars and informal gathering places were repeatedly shut down when workers reopened them without permission. Medical care, while advanced for the region, was compulsory. Workers were subjected to regular health exams. Sick leave was controlled. Disease was common: malaria, yellow fever, dysentery, snakebite, and mortality was high. In the first 2 years alone, at least 92 men died. Over the life of the project, estimates reach several thousand deaths from disease and accidents. The hospital treated symptoms. The system produced conditions. By 1930, Fordlândia housed roughly 1,000 residents. Infrastructure expanded, power systems, waterworks. Sawmill operations, but productivity did not stabilize. Labor turnover was constant. Men left as quickly as they arrived. On 22 December 1930, the pressure erupted. That day, workers launched a coordinated uprising. Administrative offices were burned. The power plant was damaged. Vehicles were destroyed. The sawmill and radio station were attacked. Communication lines were cut. A surviving photograph shows a smashed time clock, the instrument that governed work. Hours lying in ruins. Workers issued demands: the return of table service, access to alcohol, improved food and housing, an end to compulsory medical exams. For nearly a full day, management lost control of the town. Again, troops were deployed. Order was restored without executions. Hundreds of workers were dismissed. Caribbean laborers were banned from further recruitment after tensions flared between groups. Ford's response was not reform. It was attrition. Bars were closed permanently. Brothels were outlawed. Surveillance increased. The town remained under company control. But confidence within management collapsed. Internal correspondence described Fordlândia as unstable, costly, and unmanageable. The workforce was not assimilating. The system was not reproducing itself. At the same time, the plantation showed their first signs of irreversible trouble. Rubber saplings yellowed. Leaves fell prematurely. Fungal lesions spread across terraces planted only months earlier. Labor discipline could not address biology. By 1931, Fordlândia functioned as a town but failed as a plantation. The workforce existed under strain. The environment resisted standardization. Cost rose without output. The project had not yet failed, but the margin for correction was closing. The failure of Fordlândia was not sudden. It was systematic. By 1931, the rubber trees were old enough to reveal what planners had ignored from the beginning. The Amazon was not Southeast Asia. Rubber here did not grow in isolation. It survived through dispersion, biodiversity, and distance. Ford's plantations violated all three. Trees were planted in dense, straight rows, sometimes fewer than 4 meters apart in early sections. In the wild, Hevea brasiliensis grows scattered, often tens of meters apart, precisely to avoid predators. Fordlândia turned the forest defense mechanism into a vulnerability. The first enemy was South American leaf blight, caused by the fungus Microcyclus ule. It spread with speed. Spores moved on wind and rain. Leaves blistered, blackened, and fell. Saplings weakened. Growth stalled. Entire blocks defoliated within weeks. Fungicides were applied, Bordeaux mixture, sulfur compounds, but the scale defeated containment. Every treatment required labor. Every laborer required supply. Every supply traveled upriver. Costs multiplied. Other pests followed. Leaf-cutting ants, out of species, stripped trees overnight. Borers attacked trunks. Rodents damaged roots. Attempts to exterminate ants through poisons and trenching failed. Killing one colony simply opened space for another. American agronomists were brought in late. Reports warned that monoculture was untenable. They recommended mixed planting, wider spacing, and relocation to higher ground. These recommendations conflicted directly with Ford's industrial logic. Instead of adapting the system, management relocated the system. In 1933, Ford approved a second site, Belterra, located 80 kilometers south of Fordlândia on a plateau with better drainage and fewer initial pest pressures. Equipment, personnel, and investment were diverted there. Fordlândia was not abandoned, and it was downgraded. Planting slowed. Maintenance declined. The original town remained operational, but its purpose shifted from production to support. Meanwhile, global conditions shifted. The Great Depression collapsed rubber prices worldwide. Synthetic rubber research accelerated. The strategic urgency that had justified Fordlândia evaporated quietly. Internal memos from 1932-1933 describe rubber yields as negligible. Tapping. Trials produced latex contaminated by fungus and insects. Processing plants sat idle. The numbers never aligned. By 1934, less than 1% of Ford Motor Company's rubber needs were met by Amazonian production. The project had already consumed an estimated US $20 to $25 million, more than $400 million in modern terms. Henry Ford remained distant. He rejected reports that emphasized environmental limits. He dismissed Brazilian agronomists who contradicted American assumptions. For Ford, failure implied disorder, and disorder was unacceptable. Management turnover accelerated. Einard Oxholm was replaced. Successive managers attempted incremental reforms, none of which altered the fundamental design. Labor morale collapsed further as work became maintenance without purpose. The town aged quickly. Buildings warped in humidity. Metal rusted. Roads dissolved into red mud. Lawns imported from the United States failed repeatedly. Replacement parts took months to arrive. Fordlândia became a place where work continued, but belief did not. By 1934, Belterra eclipsed it as the company's primary Amazon operation. Fordlândia still housed hundreds, but the plantation no longer represented the future. The forest had not attacked violently. It had simply waited, and the system, built for speed and certainty, had no answer for patience. Belterra was not an admission of failure. It was an attempt at correction. In 1934, Ford Motor Company redirected its ambition to the plateau south of Fordlândia. Belterra sat on higher, better-drained ground, less prone to flooding and initial fungal pressure. The climate was marginally cooler. Winds reduced spore concentration. To management, it looked like a reset. The town was built faster and smarter. Housing was simplified. Roads followed terrain instead of forcing grids. Rubber trees were spaced wider, 8 to 10 meters, though still far closer than wild conditions. Mixed planting was discussed but rarely implemented at scale. Belterra performed better. Leaf blight spread more slowly. Trees reached tappable maturity. Latex yields existed, modest, inconsistent, but real. By 1937, Belterra employed over 2,000 workers, dwarfing Fordlândia's remaining population. Fordlândia slipped into secondary status. Plantations were abandoned in sections. Terraces eroded, seedlings died untended. Machinery was cannibalized for parts. Administrative offices remained, but authority shifted south. The town did not collapse. It thinned. Families left first. Skilled workers transferred to Belterra or returned home. Single men drifted in and out. By 1936, Fordlândia's population dropped below 500. Then the world changed again. In 1941, Japan occupied Southeast Asian rubber-producing regions. Global rubber supply collapsed overnight. The very crisis Ford had feared finally arrived. Too late. The United States launched emergency programs to secure rubber. Brazil became strategically important. The Amazon rubber boom briefly revived under wartime demand, but Fordlândia was no longer positioned to respond. Its trees were diseased, its workforce depleted, its infrastructure decaying. Belterra carried the burden. Yet even Belterra could not scale fast enough. Leaf blight persisted, labor costs rose. Synthetic rubber research accelerated under wartime pressure. By 1943, American factories increasingly relied on synthetics rather than plantation latex. Henry Ford died on 7 April 1947, but the decision to exit came earlier. In 1945, Ford Motor Company formally ended its Amazon rubber operations. Both Fordlândia and Belterra were sold back to the Brazilian government for approximately a $250,000 fraction of the original investment. There were no ceremonies, no announcements, no final reports. American staff departed quietly. Equipment was left behind. Buildings were handed over with inventories already obsolete. Fordlândia passed into a new phase. Brazilian settlers moved into the houses. Schools reopened intermittently. The hospital functioned sporadically. Some rubber tapping continued at subsistence scale. Most plantations reverted to forest within years. Nature reclaimed with efficiency. By the 1950s, aerial photographs showed dense regrowth. Rubber trees survived only in scattered clusters. Roads vanished beneath vegetation. The dock rotted into the river. Fordlândia did not become a ghost town overnight. It faded. By the 1970s, fewer than 1,000 residents remained. Fishermen, farmers, descendants of original workers. Electricity arrived late. Running water failed intermittently. The grid layout remained, but purpose did not. International interest returned decades later. Photographers arrived. Journalists followed. Fordlândia became a symbol of arrogance, of hubris, of industrial overreach. But the people who lived there did not speak in symbols. They spoke of jobs that vanished, of houses that decayed, of a town built for a future that never came. Fordlândia was never destroyed. It was simply no longer needed. The machine stopped. The system withdrew. The forest closed in, and the experiment ended not with collapse, but with silence. Fordlândia did not end when Ford left. It entered a long afterlife, quiet, uneven, and unresolved. After 1945, ownership passed fully to Brazilian authorities. The infrastructure was intact but aging. Houses stood empty or partially occupied. Machinery rusted in place. The plantations, stripped of maintenance, reverted rapidly to secondary forest. Rubber trees survived in fragments. Some were tapped informally by locals through the 1950s, but yields were negligible. Without fungicide programs or replanting, leaf blight returned decisively. Within a decade, the plantation experiment was biologically finished. The town, however, persisted. Former workers stayed. New families arrived. Ford-built houses became generational homes. The hospital functioned intermittently. The school reopened under state control. By the 1960s, Fordlândia supported fishing, subsistence farming, and limited trade along the Tapajos. The American systems decayed first. The diesel power plant failed. The water tower rusted. Imported electrical components became impossible to replace. Lawns vanished. Screen porches rotted. Termites consumed untreated wood. What remained were structures too solid to disappear quickly. The hospital still stood. The water tower remained upright. The manager's house endured. By the 1980s, Fordlândia was no longer isolated. River traffic increased. Brazil's Amazon integration projects, highways, dams, colonization schemes was passed nearby. Santarém grew. Fordlândia became a river stop, then a curiosity. Outsiders arrived. Photographers documented abandoned bungalows. Filmmakers framed collapsing machinery against jungle backdrops. Writers used the town as metaphor: capitalism versus nature, arrogance versus ecology. But the reality was more ordinary. Children played in Ford-built streets. People repaired roofs with scavenged metal. The old hospital served as storage, then shelter. By the 2000s, Fordlândia's population hovered around 3,000. Electricity arrived intermittently. Cellular towers appeared. Internet reached unevenly. The town existed not as a ruin, but as a living place built atop a failed system. The plantations were gone. Only a few rubber trees remained in straight lines, visible only from the air, faint scars of an industrial geometry erased by forest growth. Fordlândia's meaning shifted over time. For economists, it became a case study in failed vertical integration. For environmental historians, a warning about monoculture. For anthropologists, a record of imposed modernity. But none of these interpretations explain why Fordlândia still matters. It matters because it was never a fantasy. Every building was real. Every policy enforced. Every death counted. This was not a myth of overreach. It was a functioning system, built with discipline and money, undone not by chaos, but by precision applied in the wrong place. Henry Ford believed systems could override context. That discipline could replace adaptation. That nature could be scheduled. Fordlândia proved the opposite. The Amazon did not resist violently. It did not revolt. It did not collapse. It simply refused to cooperate. And when the system left, the forest did what it always had. It continued. Fordlândia invites easy conclusions. Hubris, arrogance, colonial fantasy, corporate madness. Those labels are convenient and incomplete. The project did not fail because Henry Ford was irrational. It failed because his logic was consistent, disciplined, and absolute. Ford believed that if a system worked once, it could be reproduced anywhere. Land, labor, culture, biology reduced to variables. In Detroit, that belief built an empire. In the Amazon, it encountered limits that did not announce themselves in advance. Fordlândia was designed as a closed loop. Capital flowed in, rubber flowed out, order flowed downward. What the model excluded were feedback loops. Soil was treated as inert substrate, labor as interchangeable input, culture as noise, ecology as backdrop. None of those assumptions were questioned early enough to matter. Historians often frame Fordlândia as a uniquely American failure. It was not. European empires attempted similar projects throughout the tropics. Most collapsed quietly. Fordlândia is remembered only because it was documented, photographed, and named. Its uniqueness lies in transparency. We can see the invoices, read the memos, trace the decisions. Nothing mysterious occurred. No sabotage, no curse, no conspiracy. Just a system optimized for efficiency, deployed without context. The workers resisted, not ideologically but practically. They did not oppose modernity. They opposed food they could not eat, rules they could not live under, schedules that ignored climate and bodies. The forest resisted, not intentionally but structurally. Fungi evolved with rubber for millions of years. Diversity was not aesthetic, it was defense. Fordlândia removed defense in the name of order. By the time adaptation was considered, the system was too large, too invested and too slow to pivot. Belterra was an improvement, but it remained bound to the same logic. The verdict is not that industry cannot exist in the Amazon, it is that industry cannot dictate terms there. Fordlândia's final lesson is not environmental or economic alone. It is organizational. Systems that refuse feedback do not fail dramatically. They persist, consuming resources, until withdrawal becomes the only rational act. That is how Fordlândia ended, not with collapse, not with bankruptcy, but with a decision no one announced. Today, Fordlândia remains inhabited. People live inside the architecture of certainty that outlived its purpose. They repair, adapt, repurpose, the very behaviors the original system excluded. In that sense, Fordlândia did succeed at one thing. It proved that adaptation and not control is the only sustainable technology. The town stands as evidence, not of ambition, not of failure, but of limits. Fordlândia's final distortion did not come from Henry Ford. It came later. As the town decayed and photographs circulated, Fordlândia was slowly converted into a parable. Articles reduced it to a punchline. Headlines framed it as proof that nature always wins, or that capitalism is uniquely blind. The complexity was flattened into spectacle. That version is easier to consume. It is also less accurate. Fordlândia was not a jungle swallowing machines overnight. It was not Americans lost in the Amazon. It was not incompetence. It was competence applied without limits. The research record is clear. Ford hired engineers, doctors, logisticians, administrators. Payrolls were meticulous. Medical facilities were among the most advanced in the region. Infrastructure exceeded nearby Brazilian towns by decades. The failure was not execution. It was assumption. The assumption that labor discipline could replace cultural negotiation, that monoculture could outperform ecological memory, that efficiency could be exported without translation. Fordlândia also did not fail alone. By the 1930s, no large-scale rubber plantation in the Amazon had ever succeeded long-term. British and Dutch plantations thrived only after rubber was removed from its native ecosystem. South American leaf blight destroyed every serious attempt to industrialize rubber where it originated. This was known and partially and dismissed. That dismissal matters. Internal correspondence shows warnings were raised early. Brazilian agronomists advised against dense planting. Field reports documented fungal spread before mass planting continued. These were not ignored due to ignorance, but because they conflicted with Ford's worldview. Flexibility was seen as inefficiency. Local knowledge as anecdotal. Delay as weakness. So the system advanced. Another myth followed, that Fordlândia collapsed because Ford imposed American morality. The record is more specific. What workers resisted was not baseball or hygiene or sobriety and abstraction. They resisted loss of autonomy, food that ignored climate and culture, schedules that ignored heat, rain, and disease cycles, surveillance that extended beyond labor into private life. Control did not stop at the factory gate because Fordlândia had no gate. It was total. And total systems amplify friction. The revolts of 1928 and 1930 were not ideological uprisings. They were pressure releases. When food, dignity, and time collide, violence becomes a language. Fordlândia's workforce was not incapable of adaptation. The system was. After Ford's departure, the town survived precisely because control loosened. Planted mixed crops, used the river instead of schedules. The town stabilized at a smaller human scale. That is the quiet irony. The only sustainable version of Fordlândia was the one Ford never intended. Today, Fordlândia exists in two forms. One is physical, a riverside town with cracked sidewalks, concrete water towers, and wooden houses aging into the forest. The other is symbolic, a warning repeatedly misquoted. Fordlândia does not prove that industry and nature are incompatible. It proves that ignoring feedback is fatal. It proves that systems optimized for certainty fail first in environments defined by variability, and it proves something more uncomfortable. Fordlândia was not an outlier. It was a prototype. Similar logic governs megaprojects, supply chains, monocultures, data systems, and cities built faster than they can listen. Fordlândia failed early enough to be abandoned. Many modern systems do not get that mercy. The Amazon did not defeat Ford. Ford defeated himself by refusing to adapt, and the forest simply waited long enough for the decision to become inevitable. After the machines stopped, something unusual happened. Nothing replaced them. Fordlândia did not become another boomtown. It did not attract a second industrial wave. No corporation stepped in to finish what Ford began. The reason was not fear. It was clarity. By the 1950s, the verdict was widely understood among agronomists and planners. Industrial rubber could not be grown at scale in its native ecosystem. Leaf blight made replication uneconomical. Any serious attempt would require genetic breakthroughs or total ecological separation, neither of which existed at the time. So Fordlândia was left alone. The absence of a successor is important. Most failed industrial sites are recycled quickly. Mines reopen. Factories are repurposed. Land is subdivided. Fordlândia resisted reuse because its original purpose had been disproven, not merely exhausted. The town became a residue. Brazilian governments debated redevelopment through the 1960s and 1970s. Proposals included agroforestry, cattle, and resettlement programs. None scaled. The land was too distant, the soil too poor, the infrastructure too specific. And yet life continued. Residents adapted the rigid grid to organic needs. Houses were subdivided, gardens replaced lawns, the river replaced roads. Fishing, small-scale agriculture, and trade with Santarém sustained the town. Fordlândia's silence was not emptiness. It was equilibrium. In this phase, the town ceased to be an experiment and became a community, one not optimized for profit but for survival. The American system decayed, but its shell provided shelter. That shell matters. Fordlândia demonstrates that failed systems do not vanish. They linger as infrastructure habits and constraints. People inherit them without inheriting the intentions. The concrete water tower still stands because concrete lasts. The grid remains because streets are hard to unmake. The hospital endures because walls outlive policy. In documentaries and essays, Fordlândia is often framed as nature reclaiming industry. That is inaccurate. Nature did not reclaim the town. People did. They live with the remnants of a logic that no longer applies, making small corrections daily. Where Ford enforced uniformity, residents improvise. Where the system demanded obedience, survival demands flexibility. The silence is not failure. It is what comes after certainty dissolves. Fordlândia today does not announce itself. There is no plaque, no official narrative, no preserved ruin. It is not curated. It simply exists, weathered, inhabited, incomplete. That may be the most honest ending possible, because Fordlândia was never destroyed by the Amazon. It was outlived. Fordlândia does not end with ruins. It ends with continuity. That is what makes it uncomfortable. Most industrial failures give us closure. A collapse, an explosion, a bankruptcy, a final date. Fordlândia denies that structure. There is no moment where the story clearly stops. It thins, disperses, and blends into ordinary life. That ambiguity is the final lesson. Fordlândia exposes a problem historians rarely confront. Systems don't fail all at once. They fail unevenly. Some parts collapse early, others linger. A few even appear to function long after their purpose has evaporated. The plantation failed first. The labor model failed next. The town survived last. What endured was not the plan, but the byproduct. This matters because Fordlândia was not built as an extractive outpost meant to vanish. It was built as a permanent American city, optimized for eternity. Its failure was not anticipated, so no exit strategy existed. When Ford left, he did not dismantle. He abandoned, and abandonment leaves artifacts. Those artifacts shape lives decades later, not through ideology, but through constraint. Streets determine movement, buildings determine settlement. Infrastructure determines possibility. Even in failure, systems govern behavior. This is why Fordlândia is not just a historical curiosity, it is a diagnostic. It shows what happens when decision makers optimize for efficiency but not reversibility. When projects are designed to scale but not to retreat. When control is absolute but accountability ends at withdrawal. Fordlândia was expensive, but its real cost was temporal. It locked future residents into a geometry they did not choose. Yet those residents adapted. They planted mixed crops where monoculture failed. They ignored schedules the river could not keep. They lived sideways to the grid instead of within it. In doing so, they solved the problem Ford never could. They made the place livable by abandoning certainty. That inversion is critical. Ford believed systems precede people. Fordlândia proves people outlast systems. And that truth is not limited to the Amazon. Everywhere large-scale planning ignores context. Ecological, cultural, biological, it leaves behind shells. Some are called cities, some are called infrastructure, some are called progress. Fordlândia simply makes the shell visible. No myth is required. No moral needs exaggeration. The record is enough. A global industrialist attempted to impose order on a living system without listening to it. The system absorbed the impact, waited, and continued. The industrial logic withdrew, intact but defeated. What remains is not a warning carved in stone. It is a place where people wake up, work, adapt, and live inside the remains of certainty. And that may be the heaviest conclusion of all. Fordlândia did not fail because it was too ambitious. It failed because it refused to learn. History did not judge it. The environment did not punish it. It simply outlived it. Subscribe, because somewhere right now another Fordlândia is being planned. One last question. Are we building it, or already living in it?